we've seen that his authority and his international influence are definitely waning.
It's all happening in the French capital. Prime Minister Michel Barnier might be heading for the exit, but the likes of Donald Trump and Prince William are arriving for tonight's reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral, 5 years after the 860-year-old landmark was nearly consumed by fire. That's where President Macron is expected to deliver a lyrical speech on the art of being French to dozens of world leaders. David Chazan is the Times reporter based in Paris, and he joins me now. Hello, David.
Hello there.
So, amongst the political chaos over the channel, how big a moment of celebration is this for France and for Macron?
Well, this is a huge moment for France and even for Christians and non-Christians throughout Europe, throughout the world, really. Notre Dame is such a huge symbol that its significance goes far beyond Catholicism and far beyond the shores of France. And this should have been, and it's certainly a moment of national celebration. Everybody accepts that Macron did a fantastic job pushing this through within 5 years, as we just heard from my colleague Adam Sage. But, you know, instead of triumphantly basking in glory, which is what this should represent for Mr. Macron, the beleaguered French president is a vastly diminished figure now casting around for a new prime minister after Michel Barnier was ousted by Parliament. And we've seen that his authority and his international influence are definitely waning. Despite that, he's treating Notre Dame's reopening like a sort of informal summit. He's going to be holding talks this afternoon with Donald Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. That's before the big ceremony. He's going to be trying to persuade Mr. Trump not to withdraw military aid from Ukraine, so still acting as if he's a big player on the world stage. I'm not sure that Donald Trump will share that view, and few people expecting to have much success in altering Mr. Trump's policies on Ukraine.
Yes, well, as you say, this is a weekend of many things for Macron, and probably, he must be absolutely kicking himself that his parliamentary chaos is happening just at his sort of the moment when he could see some glory. But the speech itself the quote is it's about the art of being French. So can you tell us who he's aiming that at and what that might involve?
Well, I think it's aimed really at both domestic audiences in France. It's going to be very patriotic. Mr. Macron's going to outline his grand vision of France's place in the world, but it's also aimed at all the people across the world who are going to be watching this spectacular reopening ceremony on TV. And so he's going to be saying, look, France has given so much to the world in terms of art and culture, cuisine, you name it. And so he's going to be sort of trying to reinforce the image that France still matters in the world.
And while he's doing all of that, he's got to find a new prime minister, hasn't he? So are there any latest rumours you're hearing about who that might be? We've had certain names mentioned and how Macron might be attempting to sort of plot a way through the crisis and sort of shore things up.
Yeah, well, there are some names in the frame, but I do caution that we heard from one of Mr. Macron's own aides yesterday who said, look, these names that are being mentioned at the moment could change 15 times over the weekend. So, I mean, having lost Michel Barnier, who was a conservative, who Mr. Macron chose because he thought he could retain the tacit support of Marine Le Pen's populist national rally, which was needed to keep the government afloat. Now that that's gone, Mr. Macron is thought to be casting the net a little bit wider. And yesterday he held talks with his former socialist colleagues to see whether he could lure them into a government, which is going to be very tricky for him because it's very difficult to reconcile all the different parties. This problem really goes back to the snap parliamentary elections Mr. Macron called in the summer, which produced a hung parliament with three roughly even blocs, the left, the centre and the right, nobody holding a majority. So the names in the frame to be the next prime minister at the moment include François Bayrou, who is a long-time ally of Mr. Macron. He's a centrist. He is acceptable to some left-wingers, but it's very unclear that the socialists will agree to his appointment. The other name is Sébastien Lecornu, who is now the defense minister. He is said to have been Mr. Macron's first choice, but so far he hasn't really rallied enough cross-party support. And we did hear that Mr. Macron intended to announce the nomination in an address to the nation on Thursday night, but he didn't do so because he realised that Mr. Lecornu just didn't have enough support. Other people in the frame would be François Barouin, who is a right-winger, and the current Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, who's also a conservative with tough policies on immigration.
Now, you mentioned the snap election, and that sort of brings back the buck back down to Macron himself, doesn't it? Now, he's vowed, on Thursday, he vowed to remain in office until his term ends in 2027. But he needs his next move to work, doesn't he? Or the pressure's going to be even more intense on him. But in your analysis, do you think he's still safe enough for the next 2 or so years? Or could this really deepen?
I think the bets are all off. Even some of Mr. Macron's own supporters are now expressing doubt about whether he'll manage to complete his presidential term. I mean, he's going to have to come up with a new prime minister early next week. If the new nomination is not a consensual enough figure and his government he suffers the same fate as Michel Barnier, it's going to become increasingly difficult for President Macron to stay in power. So it really is extremely difficult for him. Mr. Macron himself, of course, has vowed to stay in office, and he's not even really taken any blame for calling those snap elections in the summer, which he didn't have to. He has blamed voters for saying that they didn't understand what he was doing, because when he called those elections, it was after the hard right of Marine Le Pen won a resounding victory in the European elections. So instead of ignoring that result, which is what leaders have often done when people have engaged in a protest vote during the European elections, Mr. Macron called the parliamentary poll, hoping that, as he saw it, they would return to their senses and vote for more moderate parties, but it didn't happen. So we've got the extremes, if you like. We got the populist right of Marine Le Pen, the far left also on the other side, wielding more power and holding more seats in parliament than ever before. So it actually deepened the problem for Mr. Macron and essentially, let's be honest, rendered him a lame duck president.